Our habits are like autopilot. We are able to make decisions and perform tasks without actually thinking about them. This can be a most handy feature for our bodies because it essentially allows the brain's power to be redirected to things that are more important. Let me give you an example. Every morning of my senior year, I would drive to the university. It was about a 20-minute drive. My mind wasn't thinking about driving. I was thinking about my schedule, my appointments, what classes I had, when they started, when they ended, what other things I might have to do throughout the day. Meanwhile, my body is performing pretty complex tasks, turning left, turning right, merging into traffic, speeding up, slowing down, all of these things that are very important, but it's not requiring any brain power of mine. Now, how does that work? This is how habits work. It's called autopilot. You don't need to think about it. You just do it. It's programmed in. But how does autopilot get programmed in? It's actually really simple. Repeated conscious action gradually becomes a habit. Researchers at MIT have found that repeated actions create neural patterns in the basal ganglia. It's the central core of the brain. Each action causes a string of neurons to fire, and that data is saved into the brain so that the next time you're faced with the same decision or a similar one, the data of your past actions is retrieved, and this makes you more likely to repeat the last action you performed. Imagine you're in a big, wide open field and you want to get from one side to the other. The field is filled with tall grass, and so you're gonna walk along, trampling the grass down, avoiding the thorns and avoiding the rocks, and get to the other side of the field. Now what happens the next time you wanna go to that field? You take the same pathway that you started, trampling down the grass, and there's not as much resistance. Each time you come to that field, you're gonna keep on traveling that same pathway, and eventually, when there's nothing but dirt left, you've got a complete pathway. You know, the researchers have found that not only does your brain store the information about the pathway that you traveled, but it also stores the context of that action. This means that even if you create a new habit of doing something, if later on you're presented with the same context that triggered your old habit, you're more likely to return to your old course of action. This context can be anything from a location to a group of people, a time of day, the type of weather, the seasons, or anything else that was stored as that scene that triggered the habit in your life. You see, it's not just about our habits, as we may think. It's also about the context of those habits. See, the brain does not store these as two separate pieces of information. They're stored together as one piece of data. So we need to pay as much attention to the things surrounding our habits, like environments and choices, as we pay to the habits themselves, if we're really going to change them, because these things are stored together. We've just looked at the formation of habits. Habits are like the terrain of the war. In a war, whoever controls the terrain gains the advantages that that terrain has to offer. The terrain can work for you, or it can work against you. How can it work against you? Well, you know your bad habits better than I do, but let's just look at a few common ones. When the devil gains hold of this terrain, he sets up camp, and we get into the habit of being angry when things happen that we dislike. We can fall into depression over things we don't control. We find ourselves struggling with sexual temptations, and we can't control our appetites or desires, whatever it is we want, movies, music, video games, or food. We find ourselves helpless to resist. No matter how hard we try to break free, it seems like that autopilot always kicks in, and we always end up falling where we want to stand. Habits can work for us though, just as easily as they can work against us. Let's look at some of the things that can happen when God controls the terrain. You can get into the habit of praying all the time, especially when a problem arises. You can find yourself driven to study the Bible. You can find yourself sharing with others without ever having to think about it. And you can find yourself loving naturally, no matter what happens. Remember that whoever controls this terrain gains the advantages of autopilot. Now let's make this practical. How can we make sure that autopilot works for us and not against us? How can we be sure that God controls this terrain in our lives? A key to remember is that you won't find success attempting to stop a habit. Imagine with me, there is this little village. And this village has a problem because every time it rains, the water comes washing down off the mountain and destroys their village. So what should they do? Should they direct their energy in trying to make it stop raining? No, that would be foolish. The better thing to do is to redirect that water somewhere else. There are 4 simple steps that you can take to change your habits. First, find the habit's cause. If you find yourself habitually doing something, ask yourself why you're doing it. Search through your memory and find the first time you did it, and find out why you did it. Next, find the context. What are the triggers of the habit? Is it being alone? Is it being in a crowd? Could it be a person or a certain type of people? Is it your location? Is it the time of day or night? Is it even stress related? Find those contexts because that data is stored right along with the programmed response. Stay on the lookout because this will be your warning mechanism to let you know when autopilot is going to kick in. And this will allow you to strike first. Now third, find a replacement for your habit. You'll have exponentially greater success if you don't try to stop a habit. Find something to do instead. Find something that will engage that energy that's programmed to be spent on autopilot. And last, repeat the replacement. Habits are formed by repeated conscious actions. After you've found the cause and the context, what makes you do what you do, and why you do it, repeat the replacement each time the habit is about to kick in. Now, don't get discouraged when you fail. Find out why you failed and then redouble your efforts to succeed. In as little as 30 days, you can expect your new habits to take root. Just remember to take it one step at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. When it comes to this terrain, the battle will be intense. The enemy knows the advantages that he's going to lose, and he'd rather not lose them. But God is your ally. Turn to Him for strength. You can't do this alone, but your ally has far more experience and he can ensure your victory. So be on guard, be alert. The war still rages on, so plan wisely.